the complete works of Josephus Flavius, also using this as a backbone to understand the Holy Scriptures. We are calling out for all so-called black people of the captivity and black people in all four corners of the world. Black people that the Holy Book, is speaking of. And you all know who you are, because the scriptures will hit you very much differently than it hits everybody else. But we are now on chapter 2 on the complete works, and also using this as a backbone to understand the Holy Scriptures. Okay? But when I was in the 26th year of my age, it happened that I took a voyage to Rome, and this on occasion which I shall now describe, at a time when Felix was procurator of Judea. That was like a governor, procurator. There was a certain priest. There were certain priests of my acquaintance, and very excellent persons they were, whom on a small and trifling occasion he had put into bonds and sent to Rome to plead their case before Caesar, that I was desirous to procure deliverance for, and that especially because I was informed that they were not unmindful of piety towards the Most High Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, who people call God, even under their afflictions, but supported themselves with figs and nuts. Accordingly, I come to Rome, though it were through a great number of hazards by sea, for as our ship was drowned in the Adriatic Sea, we were in it, being about 600 in number, and swam for ourselves all the nights, when upon the first appearance of the day, and upon our sight of a ship of Cyrene, I and some others were 80 in all, and by God's providence, whose name is Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, prevented the rest, and were taken up into the other ship. And when I had thus escaped, and was come to Dicaercia, I had Dicaercia, which the Italians call Puteoli. I became acquainted with Alitorius, an actor of plays, and much beloved by Nero, but a so-called Jew by birth, and through his interest became known to Poppaea, Caesar's wife, and took care as soon as possible to entreat her to procure that the priest might be set at liberty. And when besides this favor I had obtained many presents from Poppaea, I returned home again, and now I perceived innovations were already begun, and that there were a great many very much elevated in hopes of a revolt from the Romans. I therefore endeavored to put a stop to these tumultuous persons, and persuaded them to change their minds, and laid before their eyes against whom it was they were going to fight, and told them that they were inferior to the Romans, not only in martial skill, but also in good fortune, and desired them not rashly, and after the most foolish manner, to bring on the dangers of the most terrible mischiefs upon their country, upon their families, and upon themselves. And this I said with vehement exhortation, because I foresaw that the end of such a war would be most unfortunate to us. But I could not persuade them, for the madness of desperate men was quite too hard for me. I was then afraid lest inculcating these things so often, I should incur their hatred and their suspicions, as if I were of our enemies' party, and should return into the danger of being seized by them and slain, since they were already possessed of Antonia, which was the citadel. So I desired into the inner court of the temple, yet did I go out of the temple again after Manahem, and the principal of the band of robbers were put to death, when I abode among the high priests and the chief of the Pharisees. But no small fear seized upon us when we saw them in arms, while we ourselves knew not what we should do, and were not able to restrain the seditious. However, as the danger was directly upon us, we pretended that we were of the same opinion with them, but only advised them to be quiet for the present, and let the enemy go away, still hoping that Gessius Florus would not be long ere he come, and that with great forces, and so put an end to these seditious proceedings. But upon his coming and fighting, he was beaten, and a great many of those that were with him fell. And this disgrace with Gessius, with Cestius, received became the calamity of our whole nation. For those that were fond of the war were so far elevated with this success, that they had hopes of finally conquering the Romans, of which another occasion was ministered. So Flavius is saying some of the mighty men of the time in Judea, aka the Holy Land, some of the mighty men had little skirmishes and little fights with governors and Roman governors, and they won. And this then elevated the spirits of the so-called Hebrews, or the so-called Israelites around, who were intrigued by war, who wanted to not be in bondage. But as we know, this was all to no avail. And we continue. Which was this: those that dwell in the neighboring cities of Syria seized upon such Jews as dwell among them with their wives and children, and slew them, when they had not the least occasion of complaint against them, for they did neither attempt any innovation or revolt from the Romans, nor had they given any remarks of hatred or treacherous designs towards the Syrians. But what was done by the inhabitants of Scythopolis was the most impious and most highly criminal of all. For when the Jews and their enemies came upon them from without, they forced the Jews that were among them to bear arms against their own countrymen. Oof! Oh, that is a sick game. But somebody has to play it, which it is unlawful for us to do. And when by their assistance they had joined battle with those who attacked them and had beaten them, after that victory they forgot the assurances they had given these their fellow citizens and confederates, and slew them all, being in number many thousands, around 13,000. The like miseries were undergone by those Jews that were inhabitants of Damascus, but we have given a more accurate account of these in the books of the Jewish war. I only mention them now because I would demonstrate to my readers that the Jews' war with the Roman was not voluntary, but that was for the main they were forced by necessity to enter into it. So when Gessius had been beaten, as we have said already, the principal men of Jerusalem, seeing that the robbers and innovators had arms in great plenty, and fearing lest they while they were unprovided with arms, should be in subjugation to their enemies, which also came to the case afterward, and being informed that all Galilee had not yet revolted from the Romans, but that some part of it was still quiet, they sent me to and two others of the priests, who were men of excellent characters, Joar and Judas, or Yozar, Jozar and Judas, aka Yoazar and Yahwadah, because Judas just means Judah or Jude, in order to persuade the ill men there to lay down their arms, and to teach them this lesson, that it were better to have those arms served for the most courageous men that the nation had than to be kept there, for that it had been resolved that those our best men should always have their arms ready against futurity, but still so they should wait to see what the Romans would do. When I had therefore received these instructions, I came into Galilee, and found the people of Sepphoris in no small agony about their country, by reason that the Galileans had resolved to plunder it on account of the friendship they had with the Romans, and because they had given their right hand and made a league with Cestius Gallus, the president of Syria. But I delivered them, the life of Josephus Flavius 3. But I delivered them all out of the fear they were in, and persuaded the multitude to deal kindly with them, and permitted them to send to those that were their own hostages with Gessius to Dora, which is a city of Phoenicia, as often as they pleased, though I still found inhabitants of Tiberias ready to take arms, and that on occasion the following: there were three factions in the city. The first was composed of men of worth and gravity. Of the Julius Capellus was the head of these. Julius Capellus was the head, and now he was, as well as his companions, Herod the son of Myrus, Herod the son of Gamaliel, and Compassus the son of Compassus. For as to Compassus' brother Crispus, who had once been governor of the city under the great King Agrippa, he was beyond Jordan in his own possessions. All these persons before named gave their advice, and the city should then continue their allegiance to the Romans and to the king. But Pistis, who was guided by his son Justus, did not acquiesce in the resolution. Otherwise, he was himself naturally of a good and virtuous character. But the second faction was composed of the most ignoble persons, and was determined for war. But as for Justus, the son of Pistis, who was the head of the third faction, although he pretended to be doubtful about going to war, yet was he really desirous of innovation, as supposing that he should gain power to himself by the change of affairs. He therefore came into the midst of them, and endeavored to inform the multitude that the city Tiberias had ever been a city of Galilee, and that in the days of Herod the Tetrarch who had built it, had obtained the principal place, and that he had ordered the city Sepphoris should be subordinate to the city Tiberias, that they had not lost his preeminence even under Agrippa the father, but had retained it until Felix was procurator of Judea. But he told them that now they had been so fortunate as to be made a present by Nero to Agrippa Jr., and that upon Sepphoris's submission of itself to the Romans, that was become the capital city of Galilee, and that the royal treasury and the archives were now removed from them when he had spoken these things, and a great many more against King Agrippa. In order to provoke the people to a revolt, he added that this was the time for them to take arms and join with the Galileans as their confederates, whom they might command, and who would now willingly assist them out of the hatred they bear for the people of Sepphoris, because they preserved the fidelity of the Romans, and to gather a great number of forces in order to punish them. And as he said, he exhorted the multitude to go to war for his abilities to lay in making harangues to the people, and in being too hard in his speeches for such as opposed him, though they advised what was more to their advantage, and this by his craftiness and his fallacies. For he was not unskillful in the learning of the Greeks, and in the independence on the skill. It was that he undertook to write a history of these affairs, as aiming by this way of haranguing to disguise the truth. But as to this man, and how ill were his character and conduct of life, and how he had his brother in great measure the authors of destruction, I shall give the reader an account in the progress of my narration. So when justice had by his persuasions prevailed with the citizens of Tiberias to take arms, nay, and had forced a great many so to do against the will, he went out and set the villages that belonged to Gadara and Hippos on fire, which villages were situated on the borders of Tiberias and of the region of Scythopolis.